Welcome to this second tutorial video about RealTest, in which we're going to take a look at the process we use for developing strategies and scanning the market, and also the various places where we can set the settings which are going to determine how RealTest processes that information. So let's take a look. RealTest, just like any other software, has its own options, and if we go to View and Program Options, you'll see that you can change things such as the year things are imported from, settings that determine how many of your computer's resources RealTest can use, the date format, and the folder where you would expect to save and load script files and data files. But there are other areas that we want to look at primarily in this video, and you can hide or show them using these buttons here. So let's remove them and then add them again. This first one here is called the Settings panel, and it determines all the settings that pertain to running a script in a backtest. And the second is called the Debug panel, and we'll briefly mention it and go over it in more detail in a later video. The first thing you'll notice about the Settings panel is that it shows the data file that's currently loaded, and if you remember from the import video, you can change which data file is loaded by clicking this button here and selecting a different one, and the active script, which is currently this sample1.rts for RealTest script. And if we change to a different script, then that will also change to show the current script that is going to be run when we click a test button. If we move along the settings panel here, you'll see that we've got the date range that is specified, and this is determined at the moment by what is loaded in the data file. We could change that to the earliest date in the data file, and we could change this to the latest date in the data file if we want to, and this number shows the number of bars which are loaded. Here we have the account size that we're going to test with. You might think that's fairly inconsequential, but it makes a big difference with some strategies if you test with $100,000 or just a $1,000 account, because it may determine how many full shares can be bought before the max positions is reached. We've got the bar size selected at daily. You can change that to weekly or monthly, although often if you want a long-term strategy, you'd still stick with daily and then use various commands that allow you to buy only on certain days. This checkbox here is worth checking if you're using securities that have a fairly short history of bars and you want to calculate things over a long distance, a long number of bars. So in this particular script we're calculating averages over 200 bars, but if we have stocks that don't have 200 bars of data, checking that box allows an approximate calculation to be used so that you can still get trades. Here we've got this section called Keep Trades. I'm going to switch to the combined.rts file to demonstrate this. If I click Test here, test runs and the results are here, and if I right click and show trade list, you'll see that I've got just the trades that ran. But if I do the same and check this box for skipped, for some strategies that can't buy all the possible setups that they have, or that are using limit orders for example, this will make a difference. So if we now click test, the test runs, you can see that it's now this test 3. I can right click this and I can click show trade list, and now I have more things listed here. As well as the trades that did take place, I have trades that didn't take place which are listed with a reason for why they didn't take place. In this case there were more than the maximum number of setups, and that can be very useful when you're trying to work out why something wasn't bought in a particular test. I'm going to uncheck that for now because I don't want that later in this video, but for debugging that's very useful. You'll notice that each time I clicked the test button, it produced a new row in the results window here. I could actually also produce other things, so I could, for example, automatically open the graph. So let's run a test now, and not only does it add a row into the results section here, but it also did the same as if we had double clicked that, and it opened the chart, and then we can actually look at things like the drawdown and so on. We've also got an option for opening automatically the orders for the next day, and for running a report. I'm going to show you this as well because it's very useful. So if I click back to my script and click test, now not only does it open that, but it also opens a browser, and this contains a full HTML report of the entire results of the test, plus some extra things that you wouldn't otherwise have, such as a breakdown by month and by year, which is very useful for scanning, correlations between the various strategies if you're running a multiple strategy system, the main charts that we just saw, and down the bottom, very usefully, the actual script itself. And this can be then saved or printed if you want to actually document your progress in developing scripts and maybe understand what you were doing later. So a very useful process there. You'll notice that there is a test settings section down here in the script, and that many of the settings are the same as we saw in the settings panel. And in fact, we can make changes here. So for example, we could change this end date to the end of 2009 and then rerun the script using the test button here. And when we flick to the results window, you'll see that it actually only tested through to the end of 2009, so we can see how the system performed during that period. Having the settings here in the script can be extremely useful because it means that they can be saved with the script itself, so that if you come back to it at a later stage, you don't have to remember what test settings you were using. You can just simply load it in and it will automatically use the same test settings as you originally used when testing that script. So returning to our original script, how would we actually develop a strategy in RealTest? Let's take a look at the process. So we've got these action buttons up the top: apply, test, optimize, import and scan, which is disabled at the moment, but if we had a scan section in our script, that would be enabled as well. What will we actually do with these to actually make a new script and test it? Well, the process begins, as we saw in our last tutorial, with importing data. First of all, we have to define our universe of stocks we're going to trade, then import it. Typically, we will import every day when we are actually running our scans for what we're going to trade the next day. But for backtesting, where we might have a large data set that has many, many years of data and large number of stocks, we might actually only import that once every week and just use that regularly during our strategy development. Then we'll write our strategy. That has to have entry rules and exit rules so that it can be tested. Having done that, we will click the test button, just like you've seen me do so far, and as soon as that's happened, the test will run and will provide a line in the results window. We then analyze those results, and one of the ways we analyze those results is by double clicking this and seeing the various charts. So we can see the equity chart, the drawdown chart, the returns on a weekly, monthly, quarterly or yearly basis, and so on and so forth. And that might give us ideas for how we can improve our script, at which point we might go back to our script and decide to make changes. And that process continues as we do script development. There are actually a couple of other buttons that are useful here. The first is the apply button. So if I, for example, made a change to my exit rule and I put and I misspelt close is greater than 10, then if I click apply button here, I would find that it checks it and tells me that that is not a valid syntax. So the apply button is useful for checking the syntax of the script, making sure that it's okay. It also does a couple of other things. When you click the apply button, it makes sure that any items that we had in a data section are calculated. We'll talk about it in a later video, and also applies any changes that you've made to graphs and charts, which we'll also cover at a later stage. The other item that we can sometimes click or find useful is this optimize button. And again, we'll go into this in a later video, but this allows us to run multiple tests at the same time. And we might want to do that by varying a parameter to work out what are the best values, or we might simply want to run a whole load of tests with some kind of randomization to see how a script would perform if the market was unpredictable. So the optimize button is often used when we get through the first stages of strategy development and want to further develop it. There are other things you can do in RealTest as well. So as well as running tests, we can scan. Let's add a scan now. So I'm going to add a scan, and I'm going to first of all create a variable called %change, and I'm going to define that as today's close, the difference between today's close and yesterday's close, which is marked as close square brackets 1 for 1 bar ago, divide that by yesterday's close, and then multiply that by 100. And that's going to give me the percentage change in the stock close compared to yesterday's close. And now I can add a command that actually only shows me, this is the filter command, which only shows me the stocks that have had a large percentage change. So I'm going to filter and have a look for percentage change greater than 5 or percentage change less than -5 if it's basically gone down 5% rather than up 5%. In order to limit this a little bit more, I might actually want to only look at stocks that are above a price of $10. So let's only look at things that have a close above 10 and then look for large changes. And finally, I want to actually look at the close, and I'm going to list that in my scan like this. So let's click apply. And you'll see that gives me an error, and that's because close is a word that's already defined in RealTest and we can't use it there. So I'm going to use it as close price, and now I've got a scan defined. So there's one other thing that we need to do before we run our scan, and that is to add scan settings. So we're going to add a scan settings section here, and just in the same way as the test settings above, this will contain settings which will override the settings panel for our scan. So first of all, we're going to specify the data file, and we're going to use the full equity watchlist.rtd file that we generated in the previous video. And we're going to select an end date of the latest date, and I'm going to ask it to scan for a number of bars. I'm going to ask it to scan the last 5 bars, so including the bar that's at the end, and that will give us the largest moving stocks for the past week. So now when I click scan here, the scan is performed, and you can see that I can sort the columns by clicking them, and over the last 5 days the largest percentage change of any stock was 67.53, and as I go down the list you can see that they decrease, and when I get to just below 5 it turns into negative numbers, so these are the large decliners and above them are the large gainers in the stocks. So having created and editing to scan, we can then sort the columns, and again using the apply button can help us to check scripts. The final process that we have in RealTest is that we might want to view a chart, and we do that either in the debug panel here, where we can change to the symbol we want to see and change the date and then click this button to view the chart. Or alternatively, if we've just done a scan as we have now, we can double click the results to actually show the chart for that particular symbol, and we can use the arrow keys to navigate up and down the list. So if I double click this one, for example, I immediately see that very large move at the end here, and if I use the down arrow key I go to the next stock and the next stock and so on, and each time the symbol is displayed at the top of the tab here. So it's very quick to review a whole load of different stocks. Charts don't have settings in the actual script file like tests and scans do, but they do still have settings which apply to all charts across the whole of RealTest, and you can get to them by going up to the chart menu and going to edit chart formulas. So for example, I could uncomment these 2 lines which had a moving average, 50-day moving average and a 200-day moving average, and in order to get them to take effect you use the apply button. So we click apply, and now when I go back into that chart you'll see that it's added a 50-day and a 200-day moving average, and I can still go through all the other charts as before and see how they relate to the moving averages that we've just added. I hope that's been a useful overview of the process we go through when developing strategies, scanning the market and looking at charts in RealTest, and where you'll find the settings that affect how RealTest does that. In future videos we're going to actually get down to the business of developing strategies and looking at the nitty-gritty of how that happens, but for now, thanks for watching.